And we are rolling on May 10th, 2018, here at UCLA in Los Angeles, California, where it's a beautiful day. The sunshine is shining. Look at those beautiful trees out there. Oh my God. Eat your heart out, East Coast. And today we're gathered to have a very important debate on the question: environmental concerns are more important than economic growth. I repeat, environmental concerns are more important than economic growth. And speaking for the affirmative for 7 minutes will be Nathalie Hines. Here.
Hi everyone, I'm Nathalie, and today, yes, we are going to be talking about the topic, are environmental concerns more important than economic growth? So today we are skipping definitions, but to go ahead, we'd like to start with our background. After completing extensive research on both environmental concerns surrounding global warming, as well as the possibility of economic growth, it is very clear that human life, future generations, and the secure state of wildlife are far more crucial than the issue of monetary gain. As for the criteria in this debate, how should it be judged? It should be judged as a cost-benefit analysis. Monetary gain isn't as important as the quality of life for mankind. As for the hierarchy of values, we believe that you can't jeopardize life for the possibility of monetary gain, and our propositions are solutions that are observable in the natural world, whereas future economic growth is a mere uncertainty. So what is the problem? Well, here today we wish to emulate the need to focus on environmental concerns surrounding global warming and their consequences. This is an urgent matter because as climate change poses an imminent issue on our planet, our quality of life is depleted and any monetary concerns would become irrelevant if life ceased to exist. How big is this problem? Well, the problem takes place worldwide and requires the adherence and action of many in order to be improved. It'll not only affect us currently, but our children, our grandchildren, and so on. So to start off the advantages to our claim. So we're going to make 3 arguments today, and we hope that you can adhere. Claim 1. The environmental concerns surrounding climate change pose a danger to human health. We believe that some may say monetary growth may help us combat these illnesses, but in reality, these illnesses wouldn't pose a problem if steps were taken to eradicate these environmental concerns. In support of this, the 2017 research journal, The Effect of Climate Change on Cardiopulmonary Disease, a Systematic Review, environmental health professor Gonzada writes, controlling release of black carbon, ozone, and methane could prevent millions of deaths. According to World Health Organization report, annually 3.7 million premature deaths occur because of exposure to outdoor air pollution and household air pollution from burning solid fuel. Also, these pollutants cause millions of deaths by strokes and heart diseases. People who live in these polluted areas are susceptible to asthma. Elevated concentration of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere have already warmed the planet substantially, causing more severe and prolonged heat waves. Temperature variability, forest fires, floods, air pollution, and droughts, all of which put us at risk for respiratory health problems. Now, you may ask, why should we care about this? But it's clear that not only does climate change pose a threat to the environment, but also consequently to human health. This is a consequence that creates a snowball effect. We want to take care of ourselves, and by minimizing pollution, which is a side effect of climate change, humans can lower the risk of heart disease. According to the CDC, heart disease is a leading cause of death for both men and women, killing about 610,000 people in the United States each year. Although there are many factors that contribute to this epidemic, diminishing one would be an enormous step in the right direction. Now, how is this preferred value important? Well, the preferred value is important because by minimizing these environmental concerns, we are able to reduce the inflammation of diseases as well as help improve the countless lives around the world. As for our second claim, we believe that it's more important to preserve our planet for future generations because our inability to take action may ultimately result in self-destruction. In 2017, Hastings Environmental Law Journal authors weigh these values, saying, However, no amount of money or property will suffice if future generations are in danger of an unstable climate that would rob them of vital resources such as fresh air and clean drinking water, which would make catastrophes caused by climate change inescapable. Ultimately, if we continue down this path of just dismissing the current environmental problems that our planet faces, our children and future generations will have to pay the price. Morally, we're obligated to save the lives of the future generations, as well as other animals living on this earth. That brings me to my third claim. We believe that with the current problems created by climate change, a wide range of wildlife faces the threat of extinction. So the first piece of evidence that we found were that polar bears are vulnerable to climate warming primarily because they depend on sea ice as a platform to access their main prey, which are ringed seals and bearded seals. But all marine prey is expected to become less accessible to polar bears as the sea ice declines. This is a quote from Molnar's report on the state of polar bears. Another issue that has come up recently, in 2015, expert Pamela Noyes, who is a toxicologist and member of the National Center for Environmental Assessment, claims that tropical coral reef ecosystems, for instance, have suffered mass bleaching and live coral loss associated with the elevated sea temperature events. And it has been estimated that approximately 1/3 of the world's reef-building corals are at high risk for extinction due to the combined effects of climate change. So this isn't just that they're just dying out. It means extinction. It means that they will not exist anymore. So again, why should we care about this? I mean, this is not humans, this is animals. But just as humans have a rightful place on this earth, wildlife does as well. So in averting our attention to monetary gain or money, we lose sight of the harm that we're exposing other living things to. We share this planet with an abundance of species, and their presence often plays a role in human prosperity. Extinctions of any sort pose a threat to ecosystems and their respective food chains. So if the coral reefs die out, many species will follow.
1 minute left.
Coral reefs house an immense amount of marine biodiversity. So if these animals don't have a habitat, they'll surely die out. It's a chain effect. This would affect not only the ocean ecosystem, but many people's income. This is where we come in. This is why it's important to us. This includes fishermen and those working in the island tourism industry, and this would have a negative impact on economic growth overall. So how is this preferred value important? Well, ultimately, as we've said before, the loss of life, even if it isn't human life, takes precedence when compared to the possibility of economic gain. Ultimately, all of these things can easily become a problem for our economy. Thank you.
I now stand open for cross-examination and points of clarification. Please come to the front of the podium, please. Stand close together so I can get you both in the picture. A little more that way. This way. This way.
So,
Derek, a little more that way.
more? Sorry. Hello. Okay. So in your first claim, when you say that monetary growth will help us, you were referring to like the opposition that they might combat the illnesses, but in reality, the illnesses wouldn't pose a problem if steps were taken to eradicate the environmental concerns. But would you would you agree that a growing economy would not help to like defeat those illnesses and like the health concerns you're speaking of?
Yeah, I think that it's important to acknowledge that a growing economy could definitely help. But the downside of that is that if we put our energy and focus our energy on the economy, then we lose sight of things that are environmental concerns that maybe could be rectified in a way without just having to spend all this money. I think a lot of the time when money gets involved, you just end up losing sight of the things that we were originally trying to do, and we focus more on how to appropriate certain funds and who gets to appropriate them. So along the line, it can lead down to distraction.
Okay, I understand that. So like, it like makes me think of like just short-term like treatment of like just like direct issues or like eradication of like something as a whole. So like I think environmental concerns can be wiped out as a whole if you start economically and like from like a bottom-up approach. Would you like, what would your response be to something like that? Like instead of just directly addressing each like little problem as they appear, like starting to like trying to eradicate versus just treat.
I think that the first, as the affirmative, we kind of believe that the first step in eradicating something, it has to be gradual. You definitely can't solve the issue of global warming in one day or in 1 hour or with one policy. It definitely takes time to grow and effort. And I think too, when we talk about this with the cardiopulmonary disease, when we first cited, the very first source that we cited in that journal, we have to imagine that these people are doing research and that takes time.
Gotcha. Okay, so I have another question, but it's all good because we have 3 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Chair will now recognize the leader of the opposition, Ms. Lean, for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Everyone, I am here to speak for the opposition. I will repeat the topic. Environmental concerns are more important than economic growth. As the opposition, I argue that economic growth, me and Derek, we argue that economic growth is more important than environmental concerns. So the way I'm going to go about this is first I will refute some of the arguments that they have, and then I will go on to talk about my arguments to support our opposition. So to challenge their values they have, their first argument, they claim that the environment concerns surrounding climate change poses a danger to human health because of lack of crop growth. We disagree because poverty remains the #1 reason to starvation and not lack of crops. Therefore, their bad economy is to be blamed for, not the environment. They also mentioned that the heart disease is the primary cause of death in the U.S. and partly due to pollution. But I had went ahead and checked out the article that they spoke about, and nowhere in their article does it mention pollution. In fact, it says that the three main reasons that people have heart diseases are high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and smoking. And nowhere do they mention anything about pollution, therefore their argument is really invalid. They also mention natural disaster as a result of climate change, but show no stats or evidence to what degree the two are correlated. As for their second argument, they recognize the importance of preserving the planet for future generations, but we disagree that this will be done by focusing on the environment, because that's based on the assumption that all the planet will be shared by all future generations. However, not just the wealthy who are able to survive. The future has become a luxury to only those who are able to maintain a life and produce children. But 9 million children are dying every day because of poverty and starvation and have no future themselves for them to be able to provide a future for future generations. On their third argument, they also said that climate change is the threat to extinction of many animals. We disagree because according to Alexander Prian, an associate professor of biology at Georgetown University, mass extinction periodically wipe out to 90% of all species in one swoop. And scientists agree that we are now in the middle of sixth extinction. Extinctions have happened throughout the duration of Earth, and we can date it back all the way to the dinosaurs and all the way to the Ice Age. Extinctions are not new, and they're a part of evolution. Now I will go to the advantages of why economic growth is very important. For my first argument, the consequences of a bad economy are very detrimental. So developing countries are suffering from their economies. An article from the Business Insider in 2018 states that Venezuela, followed by South Africa, have the most miserable economies in the world. South Africa's jobless rate is 27%. Their water reserves are so low that the city may soon be forced to turn out its staff. As for Venezuela, the economy is falling apart, which is driving the number of malnourished Venezuelans up very rapidly. Because of that, kids are dying of hunger in Venezuela. The New York Times in December of 2017 reports a story in Venezuela. An infant, Kenya Barmershan, was 17 months old when he died of starvation. His father had to go to the hospital and pick up his skeletal frame of his kids and go home to call a mortuary worker that deals directly with families that have no money for funerals. And then, medical shortages are worse. Nearly 800 women died during and shortly after childbirth last year, 76% increase from 2015. Nearly 12,000 infants died in 2016, which is a 30% rise from the prior year. We can't address environmental issues if we're still facing basic economic issues such as poverty and starvation. According to a scholarly journal in 2013, indoor air pollution is responsible for many health and environmental issues affecting women and children around the world. And that is due because they are burning solid fuels such as coal and biomass as their principal house fuel for cooking and heating. And that's worsening both their health and the environment. But why is that happening? It's happening because they don't have money and they cannot afford newer technologies such as stoves to better their lives and their environment. As for my second argument, without economic growth, we cannot afford to go green. I repeat, without economic growth, we cannot afford to go green. So without adequate funding because of a good economy, we couldn't have invested in great research. In fact, Nathalie said, a part of climate change is very important that we do research and it's not an issue to be solved over a day. So the strong economies have the best scientific research. US News in 2017 ranks the top 6 countries in research, and they are US, Great Britain, Germany, China, France, and Japan. Not coincidentally, all those countries are included in an article by Focus Economies that ranks the world's top 10 economies. So the best economies have produced the best research in the world. In addition, Wired in 2018 shared an article by Guy Callender, who is the person to discover climate change. So let me tell you about him. He grew up in London, a developed country, to a son of Britain's leading steam engineer, a successful academic, and an inventor who raised his children in a 22-room mansion. They had a greenhouse on the ground that was converted into a laboratory for this. It is this luxury of being in a developed country with a strong economy that allowed him to research and discover climate change. So I really doubt all of us here would be sitting today arguing about the topics that we argue today if he had grown in Africa, starving in Africa in a starving country. And also, green inventions are created in healthy economies. An article by UCS talks about renewable energy, how it's on the rise and costs have declined steadily and projected to drop even more. Most renewable energy today sources have produced little to no global warming emissions. The study found that the renewable energy could comfortably provide up to 80% of US electricity by 2015. Another technology that was created is efficient use of water resources in the steel industry. Its effectiveness proves that the reuse of desalinated water resulted in being more sustainable and economically viable than its discharge. But those are on assumptions that economies can afford these technologies. My third argument, the biggest economies are taking measures to combat pollution. China is cutting down on their pollution emissions, and so is the U.S. from stats that Derek will share. Lastly, just to remind everyone, we are debating here if environmental concerns are more important than economic growth, and we argue that economic growth are more important based on the evidence that we provided. Thank you.
I now stand open for cross-examination and points of clarification. Thank you very much. stand closer together, please. Yeah. Good. Okay, go.
All right, so in just some of the evidence that you've cited, Cole and I, as the affirmative side, have a few questions regarding that. In your first contention, you cite articles from sources such as Business Insider and CNN. Later, you even talk about U.S. News. What economic or environmental expertise did Thomas Coulson, the author, or Ray Sanchez have, considering these are both news-related sites and not peer-reviewed articles?
Well, journalists have the obligation to deliver accurate news, and there has to be guidelines to which is true, and they provide information about economies and their main points that they argue about are based on scientific research that they do cite inside their arguments.
So even though Business Insider is like an economic-focused journal, and that CNN would be more leftist, it's still completely credible, and the journalists completely obey those obligations every time that they report.
Yeah, they have a moral obligation to do that.
Okay, and then when you talk about the water reserves being low, can't this be related to climate change? You know, we do have to fix this with economic growth, possibly, but ultimately, can it be related to climate change?
It could be related to climate change, but at the same time, if the country wasn't so poor and suffering for poverty and suffering to make money, as I mentioned, their joblessness rate is 27%. If they had more money to invest in water resources and food, they wouldn't be really facing this issue.
Okay, and then also in your claim where you talk about the evidence with this man who lives in a mansion and he and his sons like come up with this idea for helping going green, are you saying that climate change solutions are only for the rich and we should just neglect those in third world countries?
No, I literally said that he's the person to come up with the idea of climate change and research about it. And what I had made the point is that if he was growing up in Africa, suffering for poverty and starvation, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to have discovered climate change.
Thank you very much. Okay, the chair will now recognize the member of the government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. Here.
Hi, my name is Martinez, and I'm on the affirmative side. I will be refuting the arguments you have heard from the opposition, as well as adding evidence to our claims supporting the fact that environmental concerns are more important than economic growth. For the opposition's first contention, which is the consequences of bad economy, I'd like to address that Business Insider and CNN articles that the opposition used have a little bit of faulty credibility. The CNN has been known for their questionable validity worldwide, and Business Insider has been seen to use clickbait tactics in their articles, which can cause us to question the credibility of our opponent. However, I will still refute their evidence. Lena said that Africa and Venezuela's economy is suffering from the water shortages, yet I disagree this is a consequence of a bad economy. Because according to an article published in 2018 by Carl Welch, a Pulitzer Prize winner who graduated from Harvard, and on behalf of the National Geographic, as overdevelopment, population growth, and climate change upset the balance between water use and supply, urban centers from North America to South America and from Australia to Asia increasingly face threats of severe drinking water shortages. Therefore, by addressing the environmental concerns first, we would then be able to fix the drinking water shortage and help improve the economy. Not only would this improve the health of citizens, but also water would enable them to grow crops and remain clean, especially as they point out in Venezuela, therefore allowing their economy to grow. For my second evidence on the first contention, I'll be addressing the claim that environmental issues can be faced until, their claim is addressing environmental issues can be faced until economic issues. According to the American Public Health Association, Lena had admitted that indoor air pollution is responsible for many environmental and social issues. Nathalie had confirmed earlier in this argument that it was a major health issue. This point further affirms that our priority is the safety of humans. Therefore, by improving the technology to ensure greater safety, as the opposition has stated, we would address our environmental concerns as we should. Therefore, it is contrary to the argument the opposition is trying to make. For their second opposition or contention, which is without economic growth, we cannot afford to go green, the opposition has said developing countries need a helping hand from those who are more economically developed. However, I disagree with this idea because there's a sense of urgency present when it comes to natural disasters that they refer to. In relation to our first contention about the necessity to prioritize environmental concerns over the possibility of monetary gain, we cite an article by Charles Ichoku, the Science and Exploration Directorate at NASA. Even if tropical storms don't change significantly, other environmental changes brought on by global warming could make the storms more deadlier. Melting glaciers and ice caps would most likely cause sea levels to rise, which would make coastal flooding more severe when a storm comes ashore. Therefore, if the environmental concerns became a priority, natural disasters would not be so devastating. This would in turn require less economic aid from the developed countries. The opposition's third contention, which is the biggest economies are taking measures on combat pollutions, is the opposition states that both China and the car industry are doing their part in diminishing the effects of pollution. They believe this fact correlates directly with economic growth. I have to disagree, because these measures being taken to promote the health and quality of life for human beings, therefore they do not address any issues of economic growth. In fact, these sources better support our claim that the prioritization of environmental concerns will allow the future generations to flourish. In UC Hastings' Environmental Law Journal, Nguyen states, according to scientific data obtained by experts at the National Resource Defense Council, more than 150,000 Americans may die by the end of this century due to rising temperatures from climate change. Ensuring the survival of these future generations requires the recognition and acceptance that we owe a duty to future generations. Now, to go back to our contentions, our first one is the environmental concerns surrounding climate change pose a danger to human health. Now, the evidence for this is Asagawa, a doctor of engineering and a researcher at the National Institute of Environmental Studies of Japan, reports, with regard to undernourishment, climate change has a negative impact on crop production, which is expected to increase the risk of hunger and undernourishment. Being underweight as a child is a major risk factor of disease and death in low-income countries. And this has led to serious diseases such as diarrhea, serious illnesses such as diarrhea and malaria. In addition, undernourishment due to climate change is a negative health issue, or health effects in underweight children. And at the worst, it can lead to even death. We care about this claim because if we were to prioritize the environment concerns, then we'd have an easier time combating starvation and agricultural problems, especially the countries that are underdeveloped like Venezuela and Africa. Our second contention is it is more important that we preserve our planet for future generations because our inability to take action may ultimately result in self-destruction. Now, evidence for this is Al Gore reports, scientists can measure water level rising from climate change precisely, just as the scientists could predict precisely how much water would breach the levee in New Orleans. The area from the World Trade Memorial is to be where it's located would be underwater. We care about this claim because if we do not address our environmental concerns now, then when we finally make time for it, the damages could be much worse, if not too late. Our third contention, which is with the current problems created by climate change, a wide range of wildlife face the threat of extinction. Pamela Noyes, an expert toxicologist and member of the National Center for Environmental Assessment, in 2015 stated, common elements of previous mass extinction events have included synergies between unusual climate dynamics, atmospheric changes, and intense ecological pressures that shape species lineage. Modern conditions associated with the rapidly warming climate, rising greenhouse gas levels, and human-related pressures on wildlife, such as chemical pollution, therefore constitute the types of interactive stressors that are predicted to intensify extinctions in the absence of mitigated efforts. We care about this claim because there is a clear link between climate change and extinction, and if we do not act now, there may be irreversible effects on our ecosystem, resulting in permanent extinction of species. Thank you.
I now stand open for cross-examination and points of clarification. Please come to the front of the podium. Stand close together.
How's that?
Good. A little more that way, please. Yeah, good, yeah, perfect. Okay. Good, roll.
In your refutation, you kept hammering on the fact that Business Insider is not a credible source. Are you aware of Bloomberg?
Would you like to expand on your question?
Look at me,
Yes.
Dolly.
You ha-
In what relation are you talking about?
If you had stated that you had read the argument, you would know that the article that I was citing was directly stated from Bloomberg, which is a national recognized company that addresses all the businesses and the economy. So everything that they have provided is completely credible, and the company does not afford them to be mistaken. This is where the source was. They have failed to mention where the sources were taken from. Second of all, would you say?
Oh, just one question. Were all your sources? Oh, I can't ask questions. My apologies. Go ahead.
Okay. What would you say causes more death in the world? Poverty or pollution? Simple answer.
Well, I think you definitely can solve poverty with a lot of.
But currently, right now, what is causing more? Please, simple answer.
Well,
Poverty or pollution?
Exactly. So they're hand in hand. They relate to one another. So if you cut me off, then I can't explain how they relate.
Okay.
So I hope you can see that. But anywho, the difference is if we are to address all these environmental problems, we can actually increase our agricultural ability to grow, and all our land will be much more enriched. And by solving all these problems, then we can actually cure starvation in a lot of the underdeveloped countries, because with these underdeveloped countries, maybe they don't have a lot of economies and maybe they're on farmlands and they're isolated. So economies wouldn't really matter to them because they're just caring about the food and the soil and the stuff they can get from raising on their own. So if that's the case, then yes, I would 100% that. And not to mention all the stuff about, all the stuff about the pollution would also further benefit us, because the pollution hurts the humans as well as species and everyone around us. So I definitely would say that.
Okay. Would you say that our future
time's
to?
up. Sorry.
Well, you took up most of my time.
Okay, thank you very much. Dang. The chair now recognizes the member of the opposition for his constructive speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. Hear, hear.
Okay, so hello everyone, I'm Derek, I'm on the opposition, so I'll be providing evidence as to why economic concerns are more important, economic growth is more important than environmental concerns. I'm just gonna start by repeating real quick the sense of urgency that Cole has incorporated within his argument. He says that it's just something that we have to address now, and while it is something that's very important, we have to acknowledge the fact that just scientifically we're in an interglacial period where there's just natural warming and things that come with the environment. So there's nothing that is preventable on one side other than Mother Nature just doing its own thing. But I'll start with my contentions. So my first one is going to be that development and investing in economic growth is, as opposed to directly addressing economic concerns, is a long-term investment as opposed to a short-term investment into the environment that is subject to change. And this is something that can lead us with more jobs, research, technology, as they mentioned also. But it's just sort of something a way that we can invest in the whole globe actually, but through the economy and still address the environmental concerns. So it's just kind of a means to satisfy both. An example I have is Singapore. They're a good example of a city where environmental concerns are given due consideration, and they're heavily reliant on fossil fuels and energy. And they pledged to reduce their emissions by 36% from 2005 to 2030, and they've committed $1.5 billion over the next 5 years to build a captivating and sustainable city. and $150 million will be spent over the next 5 years in the field of solar, fuel, and smart grids, which will create more jobs. I think this just goes to show perfectly how economic growth and environmental concerns work hand in hand, and that they're not mutually exclusive, that you can use the economy as a means to start and address these environmental concerns. So therefore they're a little bit more important. Another thing I have is the concept of sustainable investing. So it's something that will last, and it's a measure of sustainability. So in building a sustainable future, one that meets the needs of the people today without compromising future generations, as Nathalie said, that we want to build a future for our grandchildren, our grandchildren's grandchildren. But sustainable investing is a way that it's one of the fastest growing asset investment categories, with $6.6 trillion up from 2012, which was $3.5 trillion. That's going that's being invested sustainably in an attempt to limit risk by minimizing harm to people and the planet, and to invest in companies working toward productive and sustainable outcomes. So it just again shows how they go hand in hand. My next contention is going to be that scientific evidence shows a relationship between economic growth and the improvement of environmental health, not the other way around. So while the economy can, growth and development of the economy can help in the end address these environmental concerns, the environmental concerns aren't, addressing them solely aren't going to affect our environment. So this is kind of a win-win, when that's you can't really get a good economy just by solely addressing the environmental concerns. So with this, I have that the Living Planet Index, put together by the Zoological Society of London, shows that there's a 61% decline in biodiversity between 1970 and 2008 in tropical areas, which tend to be poorer, and a 31% improvement over the same period in temperate areas, which tend to be richer. Similarly, the poor countries tend to chop down forests, and rich countries tend to plant them. So just showing how the wealth of the country, I think, as Lean mentioned, is also crucial into the addressing these environmental concerns. So just by developing more countries and having each country economically grown, you can address a lot of the environmental concerns. Another thing, Daniel Etsy from Yale Environmental School, whatever, their environmental school, concludes that the greatest indicator of environmental sustainability index is income per person. So ultimately, the wealthier the individual certain nation, and the higher the index. So this shows that the economic growth benefits others, all the environmental concerns, and other species will benefit from the economic growth and the scientific and technological progress that comes with the growth. So my third contention is just going to be that environmental concerns put pressure on economies to ensure sustainable growth. Many of the developed countries are making calculated efforts to use innovative new technologies that lead to production of environmentally friendly goods and services. An example of this was the South Africa electrification program. If you guys heard of that, it just went to show how introducing the new technology and electrifying all of South Africa's land from 1994 to 2010, over 5.2 million households and 12,000 schools were connected to the grid, and 46,000 households and schools and clinics were supplied with electricity. And so this is all because of the 400 million annually that was supplemented into establishing this sustainability and this electrification program. So it really goes to show how they're correlated, and how with through the economy you can really build, and you're not just addressing the temporary problems, you're in the long term. I think I'm done early.
So on balance, how do we come out?
Yeah, okay, that.
Yeah,
On balance. So on balance, the opposition, we've just provided more evidence on the long-term investment into the economy, because if the world is what you're really concerned about in the end, you're going to want to invest all you can in that, and to make sure you get the best output. And addressing the environmental concerns as they occur just here and there sporadically isn't going to produce the best road in the hand. So I think just taking the time and giving like the earth a little TLC will be better than just like addressing this here and there, and that like economic growth will in the end be more important than addressing environmental concerns individually, but like they do work hand in hand, which is why economic growth is more important.
Thank you very much. I now stand open for cross-examination, points of clarification. Please come to the front of the podium. Stand close together.
Be nice.
Don't worry, I won't be like Lane.
Okay, Lane, can you move over that way? Way over. Lane.
A little bit more.
You're in the picture. Okay, very good. Good.
All right, you say in your evidence that poor countries tend to chop down forests and rich countries tend to plant them. But are you aware that in Iceland, one of the top 15 richest countries, environmental policy has historically been not a high priority on Iceland's political agenda? Whaling remains a controversial economic activity in Iceland, and at least 10 fishing communities were reported to suffer dramatically.
Look at the audience. Yeah.
Wasn't aware of that, but I do think it's like an isolated incident that doesn't go to show like the overall trend of how economic growth, like with all the other evidence that Lee and I both provided, economic growth like helps and is kind of just a better investment.
In regards to your argument, your reputations, you said that it's not a pressing matter and that we shouldn't worry about it because Cole's trying to say that it's too, gotta worry about it now when we actually don't have to. But my question for you is, do you plan on having any children?
1 minute left.
Yeah, I plan on having kids, but
Do you care about their future or what may happen to them?
I definitely do. I'm just saying,
do you think we should get a head start on on what your children's future should look like? Or do you not care?
No, I care a lot. I just.
Shame.
I know, right? Like dirty.
Shame.
But no, I care a lot. It's just I think I was going to show the point that you can't like deny just like the way the world works in science and just what Mother Nature is gonna do. But I think as I kind of feel like I iterated a lot of times, is that investing in and is better than just like treating things. So I think a better thing for my kids would be like letting them know they don't have to worry about this problem when they're my age and like, you know, when they grow up, and like taking care of it like kind of now instead of like just like, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about this, but it'll reappear later. I think that's like more what I was trying to get at.
So you do great. All right, cool. Thank you. All right.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now that we've heard a member of the opposition, it's now time to hear a member of the government engage in the first rebuttal. Two-minute rebuttal with 4 steps of refutation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nathalie again.
Hi, Nathalie.
As the opposition has said, they believe that environmental concerns are not as important as economic growth. In fact, they prioritize economic growth. I do disagree with this. In looking at all their evidence, it's clear to me that some of their evidence is not as credible as we would like it to be, so therefore I can't grant adherence. They lack credibility in their CNN articles that are contained in their brief. It can be out of date, as seen with the 2013 and 2014 articles from the American Public Health Association. Things have come a long way since then in the way that they need more help. We need to reach out to the communities and we need to save them. And letting more time go by and not having up-to-date research means that, you know, we could have a common misperception, and we need to stop that from happening. And as well as their array of pathological appeals shown with their examples, you know, of this mother and like her children, and all these things are, yes, they matter and they are emotional, but at the same time, you can't solve something without these statistics behind it. You know, we mentioned that this is in the top 15 most rich economies, and yet they're not helping save the environment as they have pointed out. Instead, they're making people overfish, and there's things like that where people are suffering, and it's about reaching out to them. Overall, on balance, this audience should vote for us, the affirmative, because ultimately it's a question of our humanity. In order to ensure the safety of ourselves, our children, and our great-grandchildren, we have to pool our energy for the environmental cause. You can't put a price on human life. Although monetary benefits may bring material happiness, its effects are short-term. And if the environment's cries go unnoticed, our planet will be in such turmoil that we may never reap this material happiness. So in the end, you know, it may seem like what came first, the chicken or the egg argument, but it's clear that our side has a cause for all of humanity. It's not a matter of making money for a short-term gain. It's about helping the long-term and seeing how we can preserve human life. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Chair will now recognize the leader of the opposition for a 2-minute rebuttal, incorporating the 4 steps of refutation, I hope.
Okay. Hi, everyone. First of all, before I address any refutations, I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on one thing. Economy does not mean pollution. The economy has existed for millions of years, ever since humans were around, and pollution was only a byproduct for the past, after the industrialization, after the car, and after we have used natural resources. But economy does not mean pollution. Also, now to go address the points of refutation. First of all, I'd like to address that they failed to apply the professionalism of the debate. They wasted two minutes of my questioning time without letting me ask any question, which shows that they are not competent enough to answer any of the questions that I have. Second of all, they keep stating that my arguments are not, my article is not credible, but they did not mention the evidence that was provided inside it. Bloomberg, they did not address that it was a very credible multinational corporation that is created to make sure that the economies and numbers they provided are correct. They also cited my CNN source, but my CNN source was to address the mother and the child. I don't understand how a research would talk about a kid who is dying in the hands of his hand. As for my 2013 research, it was a scholarly journal, which, as everyone knows, scholarly journals are not always, they take a few years to even be out. So 2013 is not very dated back, given that it is a scholarly journal. As for other points, I would like to mention that they refuted an argument that I did not talk about in my debate. They spent 1 minute and a half talking about an argument that was included in my brief but was not mentioned to be in my debate, which means that they are not listening to the arguments that I'm making, but they are solely relying on the types of on the evidence that we provided for them. I did not mention that smaller economies are relying on their on more developed countries. They did not refute the importance of research to the environment, and therefore, just to finally conclude, economy does not mean pollution, and they have failed to address many of the problems that I made. For that reason, you should vote opposition.
Thank you very much. Chair will now hear a final speech from the member of the government, which hopefully will incorporate the 4 parts of the refutation steps. Begin. He said, I disagree because therefore, in the rebuttal, yes.
So, first, the opposition had said that I wasn't paying attention because I chose to pick stuff that was what she had said instead of in the brief. Well, of course, in a brief, I disagree with this because in a brief, you're going to put everything in there, but you're only going to talk about your strong parts. So she's criticizing me for exploring the weak parts of the argument, and we were also told we could use both, so just thought I'd talk about that point. And as well as, basically, so therefore that is why, but the audience should side with us because it is our human obligation to try our best to save the lives as many of our loved ones in the future, as well as the innocent animals on the planet. We can solve these environmental concerns, and if we do, we will save money in the long run. And the world will benefit as a whole, not just the rich and not just the people that benefit from the economies. So, in all, if I was to put on one hand our planet, and in the other hand a bunch of bricks, gold bricks, then which would you choose? I would hope that you would choose our planet over this monetary gain that isn't guaranteed, where the planet is for everyone, because we all live on it and affects everyone. So I hope that you can see that the affirmative side backs up the theories that we are for the world, and you can be your own superhero by really just trying to pursue and save the world. So thank you for everyone for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Terral now here. 2 minutes of refutation in the style of 4 steps from the member of the opposition. Hear, hear.
Okay, so yeah, I'll just don't even know where to start. No, I'll just reiterate some of the refutations I made earlier about how they really focused on like the short-term things, but I know it wasn't a policy debate, but I don't know how they plan on addressing a lot of the environmental concerns they're talking about without like an economic source. Like, it's not just going to happen by the grace of God, so you need like a kind of plan of action to like just start somewhere. The method of questioning, I felt really hammered up here. I think Lean felt the same, so I think just it shows like just how we didn't really get a word in. It was kind of like, this is my point, but I just want you guys to realize how like we went with a very like clear approach that had a lot of like facts and evidence, and we didn't like want to like kind of cloud it with other things. I mean, give or take a little bit, but yeah, I think that's yeah. I mean, like the argument that Nathalie was making about how we want to invest in like it be a future. I think we definitely also that's something, but I think the environmental concerns need to like be implemented. They need to have like they can't stand alone. They're not just gonna work themselves out. So I think just knowing that we have like kind of a plan of action. I don't know. Maybe that's I don't know. But on balances, you guys should vote for the opposition because investing long-term into the economies of the world and working to address environmental concerns through the economy is far more efficient and have positive effects on society rather than investing into environmental concerns directly. There are positive effects that can arise out of a good economy that maintains the health of the environment and addresses environmental concerns, but will not have any positive effects on the economy by addressing it directly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek. And now it's time for you to cross the house, shake hands, and congratulate each other on a great debate. And now it's time for you judges to individually make your decision. Once again, as I remind you, was it based on logic, good reason, science, a good story? What was the central claim? Who had the best evidence? Whose values did you go for? Who had the most credibility? Who did the best job of refutation? Decided you grant as hearing.
Like just
You bring the need.
I've been so funny. It would be nice, like you still kind of have to like keep your composure and like still know your facts. It's hard to talk for a full amount of time.
Yeah.
What did you say was the normal point ranking?
The point spread is 80, 70 to 80, and you rank them from 1 to 4, and the best being 80, the poorest being 70. Okay. Oh, no.
I know it really.
I like that stuff. Are you bringing me a present? I don't know. Thank you, baby. Okay. Yeah. That would be. Over there. You ever turn in their diaries? Okay, great. Yeah, that's fine. Make sure you sign your name, you fill out your points, you do your rankings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was mine from Tuesday. I didn't get to print.
Yeah.
That was the one from Tuesday because I had
I
to
don't know,
leave
you probably
early.
can switch because we talked about it.
And then was
Oh, when you
this
put
one.
it in.
Yeah, I'll just put it in.
Number one. Thank you.
Yeah. Because I think overall it feels like a good thing. Yeah. I think it's more starts at 50. What was the...
Individual work, people are still writing their ballots. Silence, please.
It's just always very and it's just not just like they just simply show that the economy together, like the economy, obviously ups and downs. And it's just it's a balance. It's not it's almost impossible to like so yeah, and honestly economic growth, what that means philosophically that it means like just
Do I have all the ballots?
Almost.
so you can't ever say, okay, we're no longer going throughout. It's not a concept that people who do that.
One more?
Yeah.
Is there a stapler over there?
Yeah,
No,
I think so.
but I think maybe
Someone.
I got it, I got it.
yeah.
I personally like the definition.
Thank you.
I like value debates. I had done some like
I think this is something we should always in every specific proposition. Like every ask like what is this like the spectrum of economic to environmental it's not something that we talk about as like because it doesn't make sense of like
yeah. I agree.
so if I have a I mean, no, but it was like a presentation where you like stated what
On a 7-13 decision it goes to the opposition or the negative. Now, we're going to start in the rear today. In the rear. What was your standard of appraising the arguments? And what was your decision? Stand up for Jesus.
My name is Yassine.
Your name is Sistine?
Chapel. No,
You're named after the chapel?
No, I wish. Today I went into it really looking for.
Say how you voted first.
Oh, I voted for the affirmative. Today I went into the debate looking for who is going to be more composed at the podium and who would have the best evidence. And I felt like for those two criteria, the affirmative won in my eyes. I did think that there was a lot of fluff in your one little exchange with Clean that was kind of detracting from your argument because it did almost seem like you were trying to avoid being asked questions. Just so, I guess my advice would be just let it ride and just take your blows.
Right.
And that's it.
Let me comment on that if I could, Mr. Sistine. I've seen this as a trial consultant where the lawyer was, I'm not saying that the goalie was this way, but the lawyer on one side was so obnoxious. When I interviewed the jurors afterwards, they voted against the lawyer, not for the client or defendant or the other side, just against this lawyer that was an a-hole. Now, I'm not saying Cole was an a-hole, but you know, that can happen. You are so obnoxious, you become the issue. And we were bordering on that. So thank you for, I agree on your point. The evidence was rather clearly, in terms of orally cited too. And I was sitting here reading it, you know, because I had both briefs in front of me. The evidence was clearly, that was your standard. The evidence was clearly superior by the affirmative. All 2017, 18 from refereed sources. Yes, please.
My name's Brittany.
Hi, Brittany.
I voted for the opposition, and I value delivery, and for me it was hard to focus on, like you were saying, the evidence probably, it was definitely stronger than affirmative, but it was hard for me to focus on what was being said because I was so distracted by like kind of the tense, like back and forth, and I felt like it distracted, like you said, and then it also wasn't, not professional, but I think when you're doing a debate, you should focus on presenting your information rather than nitpicking each other.
Okay. So you found that your standard was who had the best delivery.
Yeah.
And you found the best delivery by the opposition.
Yeah.
Great. Very legitimate. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Serena,
Hi, Serena.
and I voted for the opposition. For the standards, I value good reasons, and I think Lean was really spot on when she said that the affirmative didn't touch on some issues. So I think the affirmative mentioned over and over again, it's like planet versus monetary gain, and which is more important, but I don't think the opposition really touched on monetary gain and like the amount of money you could make in the economy. But rather, I think the opposition's strongest argument was how you can, through economic growth, it affects the environment, and it's not the opposite way, and that was like never addressed. So that was the winning point for me, and that's why I voted for opposition.
Yeah. There is other evidence, and I don't know if any of you have come across it yet in your research, called the Kuznets curve, that has found that it takes a poor economy to get up to such a certain point before they can even start to put pollution measures in effect and pay for them.
Yeah.
So if our friend here, Derek, has specified, especially the context he was talking about was beginning economies really need a chance to get on their feet before they can get any pollution control. His arguments were devastating in that respect. It was a matter, he didn't specify the context, but you know, like, on that level, they're true. Yeah. Yes, please.
Carolina.
Hi, Carolina.
I voted for the opposition, mainly because I thought, I mean, everyone did a great job, but you guys do not forget that you have like economic growth and environmental concerns, and on a balance, you guys chose economic growth first, but not ignoring the environmental issues. And I think you guys kind of, well, not ignored, but it was more about like, there are environmental issues, and we need to address them, instead of what about the economic growth? What about the people dying of hunger or something like this? I would say something though, for the opposition, that I just talked to critique about it. Singapore is a nice example, but you need to consider that Singapore is an island, so it's like small. You need to also think a little bit like bigger about the first economies in the world and how they are dealing with environmental issues. I'll give you an example. I'm from Brazil, and we're the 7th largest economy in the world, and we still have, though we have environmental issues, we still deal with them in a very good way compared to other countries. So I just see a little bit of like bigger places that they have both.
Yeah. I would also add, Carolina, that Brazil is doing quite nicely, but Venezuela is having a few problems. Yeah. And that's why I was saying to Derek, he really needs to specify where he's talking about it, in what context and in what phase. Let's go here.
Hi, Pratik.
Hi, Pratik.
Hi. I voted for the opposition for a couple of reasons. I think the weighing mechanism or the criteria that was set by government on net benefits was good and fair in that it allowed opposition to have some sort of ground. Insofar that it goes, why should environmental concerns supersede economic growth? I think Carolina pointed it out decently well that why should one pursue this at the cost of other? Instead of just rather focusing on the environmental concerns that people are being affected by that, it would have been helpful to show how economic growth probably cannot address the environmental concerns that need to be addressed immediately. So having that sort of evidence that was more tailored towards that sort of resolution and analysis would have helped more in providing and showing why economic growth, even if they say will help in the long term, it's necessary in the short term to achieve that. That would have helped and created some sort of solvency measures to put your side ahead, because I love the way everyone presented evidence, especially even on the government side. It was so fluent, it was really well done. It's just that if it was a little bit more targeted and a little bit more pertinent to what would have been done on the net benefits of the comparative, would have been stronger for the government side. Opposition side really did a well-rounded job, especially in like Derek's speech, when you bring in the focus as to how economic growth leads to the eventual targeting of environmental concerns. And I think that link, as Professor Miller really pointed out, in relation to the Kuznets curve is really important. While specifying that would have helped more. A bit of comment for both sides. While a little bit of snarkiness within debate is fine, and rather to my preference at least is recommended to a certain extent to put yourself ahead of the other side. Probably some people might disagree with that. It can border the line of disrespect to the other team as well, and that's something that really needs to be kept into mind. And if you felt that within your cross-ex, neither of you had chance to respond, especially like Cole said, you're not giving me the time to respond, that's something that, the response is something that you can bring up within your rebuttal, because that's another opportunity that you have to respond. And I think that goes for both sides as well, that if you feel pigeonholed during cross-ex, bring up that response, not the fact that they didn't allow you to respond within your rebuttal. So that's something that can be considered.
That's good. Yeah, in my article, I talk about the idea that if a person is going on, you can say in a firm voice, "Thank you," and just sort of cut them off. I don't recommend putting your hand over their face or anything that obnoxious, but a firm thank you often will stop them. I was going to ask critique, you know, of their three contentions, you know, which were pretty crisp, but they weren't focused on the comparative. That was the problem you had, right? Yeah. Do you understand his critique?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
you
should
do.
have applied it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I
Okay.
didn't think of that yet.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Haley.
Hi, Haley.
Okay, so first of all, you guys did such a good job.
Watch
Pratik and
your
I were
vote.
off. Sorry, I went off. Pratik and I were back here just being like, wow, it was so good. Like all of you, like your composure was awesome. So good job. I really liked how like you guys went back and forth with the debate. Like one side would say something, the other would directly combat it, which I love in debating. The criteria was really good with the net benefits. The reason why I voted off was mainly because of what you were saying, of like you guys were giving me this world in which you get their benefits, but faster, and like you actually will achieve them. So I was convinced in that sense that like even like it's necessary to have economic growth in order to obtain environmental concerns. And yeah, so that's why I voted for you guys. On the affirmative side, you guys like definitely tapped into like all of these values that like I hold, and I'm sure like most of the class holds. But what I needed to hear was why your side is better than theirs. Like you could have pointed out, well, like their side still uses like all of these like bad things. This is why you should prefer our side, because like at least from what the debate I watched, like their side seemed preferable to me. And yeah, some judges like manner over matter or matter over manner, which is like manner is how you present yourself. If I was voting that way, I probably would have voted the other way because I thought you guys were a lot more respectful. Complaining about people not answering your questions isn't the best way to go about your time. It's just kind of a waste.
Whining.
It's yeah. I mean, maybe it's like then your question might need to be better. Like if they're not answering it the way that you want it to be answered. And so yeah, but overall, I really liked it. Good job.
Haley, before you stop completely, one of my frustrations from all four was simply when we got to the refutation stage, it fell apart.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just not clear to everybody yet what I mean by refuting their arguments. And you came as close as anybody of at least repeating your claims in the last 30 seconds, which was something, you know, which they hardly breathed on, you know, which was good. But more to the point was they said, you know, we have heart deaths. I disagree because we refuted their not linked pollution. Therefore, that's not a reason to favor this value hierarchy. They said this, we disagree, therefore you don't favor this value hierarchy. You see what I'm saying? That's what I was more looking for from everyone. And yeah, Cole, you just sort of just did a, not singling you out, but you just did sort of a, when you watch yourself tonight on YouTube, you'll see you just kind of did a free association, sort of like whatever came to your mind instead of a structured refutation. He had 3 arguments, so I would have liked you to have at least gone to those and explained to us why they were wrong. He said this, I disagree because, therefore don't vote for him on that. Okay. Yes, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
So I voted for the opposition,
And what was your model?
Basically, I really like that they pointed out that, you know, you first need economic growth before you have these, like you worry about the environment, because at the end of the day, like, yeah, we're worried about the earth and everything, but we're also worried about the people who are like starving and are suffering because of poverty and so it's not really like like I found some of the comparisons to be inaccurate, like choosing the earth or gold bars, because at the end of the day it's all about humanity. Like both the concerns are about humanity, so I just liked how they address kind of both sides, and but then it said like, okay, but we still need the economic growth first before we could address these things. I thought everyone did a really great job. It was really entertaining to watch, and like it was really good. So yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. One thing I want to mention to all of you, which will come up in your choices of evidence, and it came up in Lean's choice. Lean chose to use an anecdotal story from a lady, right? Was that enough? Were you impressed by that in absence of bigger statistics, or statistics plus that would have been enough? They criticized her severely for that. Do you hear what I'm saying?
But it provided stats right up there.
The emotional, if it's provided pathos.
That's what
I agree.
trying to do.
I'm just pointing out to everybody that it's a risk when you have a limited amount of time to do too much of that. Okay? Yes, please.
Tyler.
Hi, Tyler.
So I was really on the fence, but I voted affirmative because I feel like
model?
On evidence. I feel like your guys' constructives had a lot more evidence and just were better presented. And I do feel like they were maybe lacking statistics that you guys didn't have. But the reason I almost voted for opposition was you guys used really good rhetorical language, especially Derek. You kind of understated what they were saying, like a little TLC and stuff like that, and just kind of absorbed environmentalism into like the economy. Like you kind of just made it seem smaller than it was.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
I am Jacob.
Hi, Jacob.
I voted for the affirmative because I thought their logic and they had good reasons, and their debate with their evidence was easy to follow. So was theirs, but it was a little bit better on that side. And I don't get why people are kind of bashing Cole for his for that cross-ex, because that part is to like answer the question. I thought he did a good job of answering the question. It's the choice of what question to ask, and if this question is going to have a long answer, maybe not ask that one to fit more questions in, but I thought the answer was sufficient to the question length.
Yeah, you know, if someone lets you run with a question, lets you run on.
Can I just say something about that? I feel like it is stronger to answer questions succinctly because it does seem like, sports players, it was clock chewing.
It's good sportsmanship. And at some point it looks abusive, but to him it was, go get her, baby.
Hi everyone, I'm Danielle. So I voted
Danielle Liederman, beautiful name.
I voted off for a few reasons. So what I wanted to base it off of was evidence, in which the affirmative would have won because they had more evidence. But I don't think that the evidence was tailored to fit comparative. So they gave a lot of evidence on it's presenting danger to human life XYZ, it's endangering species XYZ. But we're looking at that compared to economic growth. And I feel like there wasn't enough comparative there. So I based it off of good reasoning, and what I mean by that is affirmative presented it as either or, presented it as a relationship, in which what's the first step, right? And what I think I would have liked to see from Op, and I did step outside to use the restroom, so you might have said this. In the beginning, we talked about all the money that it's going to cost for us to do these, right? So to just hear that, like it's going to cost $150 million. Affirmative, how can you say that environmental concern is more important than economic if we don't have the money to do that in the first place? Does that make sense? So that's why I voted off.
Yes, please.
I'm Kiara. So I voted for the opposition, and my values were clarity and also like what you do with the evidence. I thought both groups did a really good job like road mapping what they were going to say and like making it very clear to the audience of where they were going with their arguments. And then as for like what they did with the evidence, I really liked how Lean like fact checked their evidence, saying like it was like the article about heart health or something like that, and you read that article and found like what was actually being talked about. And I thought that was like really clever, and it stood out to me. Yeah, because like you obviously get the brief, but it's like what you do with the brief, and like the more research you do, it shows like how invested you are actually like, in the topic. So
She would back down.
yeah, she didn't just take what she was given. She like went in more.
Okay, so values with clarity with their evidence, huh?
Hi, my name is Malik.
Hi, Malik.
I voted for the affirmative because my standard was evidence, and they had really solid evidence. I liked how they presented, like they were like this Harvard professor, and they were very specific about who he was, and so yeah, that was big. But other than that, I think the opposition did a really good job, especially with, I was close to voting for the opposition because Lean was able to refute Nathalie's article about heart health very well, and like I think that undermined their credibility really, really, really well. I thought that, well, maybe now I started questioning their evidence, but
Yeah. Was that more persuasive to you than Derek's economic, that kicker got up money or you can't do it?
I think so, because it undermined their credibility. Now you start questioning all their other sources.
Okay, good. Just for
Oh, I am going.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm William. I ultimately voted for the opposition. It was very close, but I think for me, I was going off of logic, and I liked how at the beginning the affirmative said, like, we're looking at quality of life ultimately, and I think the affirmative definitely had a better narrative. Like, their case was more compelling, and I think it was more cohesive, but the opposition definitely showed us like how they were addressing the resolution a lot more. I especially liked when Derek did bring up the fact that like, yeah, this isn't possible. Environmental concerns are not possible without economic growth. I do think the opposition did, like Tyler stated, they underplayed like the really big important parts that the audience should know, but I think ultimately it came down to how they interacted with the resolution, and I think the affirmative just kind of dropped the ball in terms of like showing us why their side is ultimately better.
I think that some of that work could have been done for themselves in rebuttals by reiterating their case, which they did.
Hi, I'm Frank.
Hi, Frank.
I think the question is kind of biased because I think the question is more of a case-by-case. It should be used in a case-by-case basis. I don't think it should be used, because what does it mean if we grant adherence? I think it means we think it should be applied to every country in the world, or in every policy, in every situation in which a policy will be made. And what it would mean to me if I grant adherence to the affirmative would mean that I think that should be applied to every instance in that case. So I think a couple of you guys were mentioning it. I don't think it should be applied to certain countries where like they're not even in a position for this to be applied yet. And that would, if I grant adherence to them, and that would imply I want to restrict their rules in other countries, and I don't want to be in that position morally. I think what Danielle covered too was either or situation. Was that you guys were, if I grant adherence to you guys, it just means it's open to debate. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if one is greater than the other or if it's a mutual relationship. And I think that's the end truth, and that's why I voted for them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's a long discussion we can have, but we only mean that this resolution is true within the context of what was said in this room by these debaters as they operationalize it, as they parameterize it within their arguments. But yeah, you're right. Of course. That's what I was saying. We have to specify. He meant, third world country, African country, that haven't been rectified yet. So. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Sippy.
Hi, Sydney.
So I chose the affirmative more on the basis of evidence and delivery. I personally just think that Cole and
How'd you
now,
vote?
affirmative.
Affirmative.
Yeah. I just felt like the delivery was a little bit easier to follow personally, and I think it could have been also really strong to bring up the fact that, well, yeah, the economy and economic growth is important, but how long have we focused on that? For decades now, and it doesn't really seem like anyone's really addressing or potentially offering great solutions to solve poverty or, you know, eradicate it to an extent. So I think that could have been also addressed, and you know, Business Insider, CNN, all of them. I mean, Bloomberg is a great source. I just personally think that at the end of the day, there's people that back that are pushing more corporate economic growth than thinking about the environment. But yeah.
Good. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Elsie.
Hi, Elsie.
Both teams doing great, and both indicate very clear claims and provide strong evidence. But I voted for opposition because they have very solid evidence and argument, and they claim that without economic growth, we cannot afford environmental change like that. So I feel like this is like more persuasive than the other side.
Last but not least.
Hi, I'm Brett Nagy.
Hi, Brett.
I voted for the opposition, mostly because I enjoyed how Derek like summarized and used eye contact, and like he would read from the paper and then after that summarize what he was saying in words that were not, I assume, on the paper, and it made it like point by point easier for me to follow. Where some other speakers, it was from the paper directly, so I'd have to like choose to like what I was listening to and try to keep up or skip over stuff. So I enjoyed how Derek step by step kind of summarized it for me. I also thought he did say one thing that was like similar to what you were saying about the countries. He said that like the wealth of the countries leads to the ability to address environmental concerns, which I thought was a key point for me. I also thought, you know, like you can't, for that affirmative, you can't implement the infrastructure necessary to address the environmental concerns without economic growth. What I've also would have liked to see from opposition is more focus on like if economic growth stopped or like didn't grow at all, what would happen? Like would people be concerned about the environment at all? Or would they like focus more on just the economy and therefore like it couldn't be that? Yeah.
Well, thank you all for a robust debate and a good critique. Our work is done.